Global growth remains steady at 3.2% this year, unchanged from our April World Economic Outlook, and slightly higher at 3.3% next year. But there have been some notable developments since April. First, growth in major advanced economies is becoming more aligned as output gaps are closing. In the United States, we see increasing signs of cooling. In the euro area, meanwhile, growth is picking up. Asia's emerging market economies remain the main engine for the global economy. Growth in India and China is revised upwards and accounts for almost half of global growth. Yet prospects for the next 5 years remain weak. Growth in China is projected to moderate to 3.3% by 2029, well below its current pace. As in April, global inflation will slow to 5.9% this year from 6.7% last year, broadly on track for a soft landing. But in some advanced economies, especially the United States, progress on disinflation has slowed. Risks remain broadly balanced, but some downside near-term risks have gained in prominence. First, there could be bumps on the disinflation path in advanced economies. This could force central banks, including the Federal Reserve, to keep borrowing costs higher for even longer. That would put overall growth at risk, with increased upward pressure on the dollar and harmful spillovers to emerging and developing economies. Mounting empirical evidence points to the importance of global headline inflation shocks, mostly energy and food prices, in driving the inflation surge and subsequent decline across a broad range of countries. The good news is that as headline inflation shocks receded, inflation came down without a recession. The bad news is that energy and food price inflation are now almost back to pre-pandemic levels in many countries, while overall inflation is not yet. One reason, as we emphasized previously, is that goods prices remain high relative to services. Unless goods inflation declines further, pressure on services prices and wages may keep overall inflation higher than desired. This remains a significant risk to the soft landing scenario. This means that monetary policy must remain vigilant, avoiding a premature easing, especially where the economy remains strong, but also avoiding excessive delays once inflation is decisively on its way back toward targets. Second, fiscal challenges need to be tackled more directly. In many countries, public finances have deteriorated more than foreseen before the pandemic, leaving them more vulnerable. Gradually and credibly rebuilding buffers, while still protecting the most vulnerable, is a critical priority. Doing so will free resources to address emerging spending needs, such as the climate transition or national and energy security. Stronger buffers also provide the necessary policy space to address unexpected shocks. Unfortunately, projected fiscal consolidations are largely insufficient in too many countries, and this magnifies economic policy uncertainty. For instance, it is concerning that the United States, while at full employment, maintains a fiscal stance that pushes its debt-to-GDP ratio steadily higher, increasingly relying on short-term funding, with risks to both the domestic and global economy. Third, the gradual dismantling of our multilateral trading system is another key concern. More countries are now going their own way, imposing unilateral tariffs or industrial policy measures. Our imperfect trading system must be improved, but this surge in unilateral measures isn't likely to deliver lasting and shared global prosperity. If anything, it will distort trade and resource allocation, spur retaliation, weaken growth, and make it harder to coordinate policies that address global challenges, such as the climate transition. Trade instruments have their legitimate place in the policy arsenal, but because international trade is not a zero-sum game, they should always be used sparingly within a multilateral framework and to correct well-identified distortions. Unfortunately, we find ourselves increasingly at a remove from these basic principles. Constructive multilateral cooperation remains the only way to ensure a safe and prosperous economy for all. Instead, we should focus on sustainably improving medium-term growth prospects through more efficient allocation of resources within and across countries, better education opportunities, and equality of chances, faster and greener innovation, and stronger policy frameworks.